This is not just a video. This is a wake-up call disguised as wisdom. If you're tired of surface-level motivation and ready to hear the truth most people are too scared to say, then listen closely, because what you're about to hear could either offend you or awaken you. But if it hits you right, your whole mindset will never be the same again. You think you want success, but what you really need is wisdom. Because without wisdom, success destroys you. Without wisdom, wealth evaporates. Relationships collapse. Power corrupts. But King Solomon, he asked for none of those things. He asked for wisdom, and because of that, he got everything else. That's the secret no one talks about anymore. People chase money, chase fame, chase followers, but they're building palaces on sand. Solomon knew something far deeper. Wisdom is the foundation of all power. And when you truly understand that, your life starts to move differently. Imagine this. You're offered anything: riches, revenge, long life, kingdoms. But you say, give me an understanding heart. Give me discernment. That's what Solomon did. And God didn't just honor the request. He multiplied it, because real wisdom is the kind of currency that heaven respects. It's not loud. It doesn't chase clout. But it rules silently from the shadows. Solomon didn't need armies. He had insight. He didn't need to fight. His wisdom made kings bow and nations listen. You think power is loud? Real power is quiet. It walks into the room and the atmosphere changes. That's Solomon's secret. You want to win? Start by seeing what others overlook. Solomon said, above all else, get wisdom. Not because it sounds noble, but because it's necessary. Wisdom isn't just knowledge. It's knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. It's knowing the cost of your words. It's knowing when to walk away and when to stand your ground. It's seeing 10 steps ahead while others are trapped in the moment. And if you don't have that kind of vision, you'll keep losing to people who do. Life isn't fair, but wisdom levels the field. It turns slaves into kings. It silences your enemies without you saying a word. People talk about Solomon's wealth, his palaces, his power, but they forget none of that came first. What came first was a request. Give me wisdom. That one decision shaped the destiny of a nation. But what about you? What are you asking for? What are you chasing? You beg for comfort, but comfort never made a king. You plead for miracles, but ignore the manual. Solomon didn't ask for a miracle. He asked for mindset. That's the shift. That's the code. And until you stop praying for shortcuts and start praying for strategy, you'll keep circling the same mountains, living beneath your calling. Solomon's wisdom wasn't random. It was earned through discipline, reflection, and divine alignment. He studied nature, people, pattern. He understood that everything has a rhythm, that success isn't seized, it's synchronized. You want more? Learn how the world works. Learn how you work, and stop moving emotionally through a logical world. Solomon mastered his mind, and that is why he ruled. He didn't just react, he responded. He didn't just speak, he measured his words. That's why his proverbs still live today. Wisdom outlives wealth. Write that down. Here's the hard truth. Most people don't want wisdom. They want ease. They want God to fix what their laziness creates. But Solomon didn't get handed a crown. He carried the weight of it. Wisdom brings responsibility. It forces you to think deeper, move slower, and lead better. That's why most people avoid it. They say they want the truth, but they can't handle what it demands. Because wisdom will make you confront your ego. It'll break your patterns. It'll burn away who you think you are to reveal who you must become. Solomon understood timing, and that's a rare kind of intelligence. He said, there is a time for everything, a time to build and a time to break, a time to speak and a time to stay silent, a time to chase and a time to be still. If you don't understand timing, you'll move too fast and lose what was meant for you, or wait too long and miss what was already yours. Wisdom is knowing which is which. Some doors aren't locked, they're just not yours. Some battles aren't lost, they're just misaligned. When you think with wisdom, you stop forcing and start flowing. Solomon's greatest legacy wasn't gold, it was guidance. His words live on because they weren't just clever, they were consecrated. He saw deeper, he spoke less, he listened more. And in a world addicted to noise, that kind of silence is dangerous. That kind of man can't be manipulated. That kind of woman can't be deceived, because wisdom sharpens your senses. It teaches you to discern motives. It teaches you to see when others are blind. And when you operate from that level, you become unshakable, untouchable, and undeniably destined. But here's the twist. No one tells you, even Solomon with all his wisdom fell, because wisdom is not enough if you stop applying it. Knowing what's right means nothing if you stop choosing it. Solomon let distractions corrupt his clarity. He let pleasure pollute his purpose. And that's your warning. Don't just get wisdom, protect it. Don't just speak it, live it, or you'll lose everything it built. Your downfall won't come from lack of knowledge. It'll come from forgetting what you once knew. The enemy isn't just ignorance, it's arrogance. Solomon's true power wasn't just what he said, it was what he understood. He knew how to read between the lines of life. He studied cause and effect. He knew that greatness is not built in moments of applause, but in the silence of self-control. That's why he wasn't just a king of people, he was a master of himself. And that's the hardest kingdom to rule. Everyone wants to lead others, but can you lead your thoughts? Can you command your emotions? Can you choose patience over pride, restraint over reaction, purpose over pleasure? Solomon did. That's why he ruled with authority most men will never taste, because he ruled the one thing most men avoid themselves. One of Solomon's secrets was this: he didn't worship his gifts, he stewarded them. He knew that favor can be a trap if it makes you arrogant. That success can be a curse if it blinds you to wisdom. He understood that having talent means nothing if you lack temperance. He never confused access with arrival, and that's where so many fall. They get a little recognition and they stop growing. They get a little success and they stop listening. But Solomon, he kept seeking understanding, kept refining his lens, because true wisdom is never finished. It's always evolving. It doesn't just ask what works, it asks what lasts. Another powerful secret was Solomon's mastery of observation. He was a student of everything. He watched nature and drew truth from ants, birds, storms, and seeds. Why? Because the wise man doesn't need a lecture. He finds revelation in the ordinary. He doesn't just walk past a tree. He studies how it survives. He doesn't just see a fool. He learns what not to become. That's the level Solomon operated on. He realized that every moment, every movement, every person, every problem carries a lesson. And wisdom means being humble enough to learn from everything. Even your enemy can be your teacher. Even your pain can be a prophet. Even your delay can be divine. Solomon also understood legacy. Not just wealth, but wisdom passed down. That's why he wrote Proverbs. Not to impress, but to impart, to leave behind a mental map for the next generation, because a wise man thinks beyond his own lifetime. A fool lives for the now. But Solomon built for eternity. That's what separates leaders from legends. Leaders build castles. Legends build blueprints. The difference is this: one fades with time, the other transcends it. So ask yourself, are you collecting riches or creating a road? Are you chasing your moment or preparing a movement? Another hidden code in Solomon's life is this: peace is power. Most people chase dominance through noise, force, argument, but Solomon ruled during Israel's most peaceful era, not because he was weak, but because he was wise. He knew that peace is not the absence of battle, it's the presence of order. Wisdom brings order to chaos. It silences confusion. It aligns priorities. That's why his reign flourished. That's why his enemies didn't even bother to rise. Because when you walk in wisdom, you become untouchable. You don't have to fight for respect. It flows to you. You don't have to beg for recognition. Your excellence demands it. But perhaps one of the most haunting secrets of Solomon's story is this: even the wisest can fall when they start entertaining the wrong voices. He began with clarity but ended with compromise. Why? Because the people you allow into your inner circle will either sharpen your purpose or sabotage your soul. Solomon aligned with women who brought foreign gods into his heart. He tolerated what he once would have torn down, and slowly the fire dimmed. The insight faded. The man who once asked for wisdom began to ignore it. That's the danger. Not losing it all at once, but drifting from the very thing that made you great. The lesson: guard your gates. Protect your focus, and never let your comfort rewrite your convictions. Solomon's life whispers this final truth. You can be wise and still weak if you stop walking in what you know. Wisdom isn't just knowing it's doing. It's obeying the quiet voice that tells you, don't go there. Don't trust that. Don't ignore this. And the moment you silence that voice, you start building your own destruction. Slowly, silently, brick by brick, until one day the palace crumbles, not from outside attack, but from internal erosion. So keep listening, keep aligning, keep humbling yourself before the source of all understanding, because the moment you think you've arrived is the moment you've already started falling. There was another secret Solomon carried, one that very few people ever notice, not even those who quote his proverbs. It was the sacred tension between silence and speech. Solomon knew the power of words, but he also feared their consequences. That's why he didn't speak unless he had something weighty to say. He understood that a fool is known by his many words, but a wise man is feared for his few. In silence he listened, in silence he heard things noise. Could never teach. That's what most people miss today. They're so busy trying to be heard, they forget to hear. They're so loud trying to look wise, they expose their emptiness. But Solomon, he trained his tongue to serve his mind, not betray it. He once said, even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent. Because sometimes, wisdom is not in your answer, it's in your ability to wait, to watch, to hold the room without having to dominate it, to observe a situation fully before stepping in. You see, Solomon's intelligence wasn't just intellectual, it was spiritual, it was felt. He could walk into a space and read the atmosphere. He didn't just respond to words. He discerned spirits. He could tell when someone was lying even if they said all the right things. That's why the two women who came before him to claim the same baby never fooled him. He didn't need proof. He used wisdom. And that level of discernment doesn't come from books. It comes from alignment with truth. One of his deepest insights is found in his respect for time. Ecclesiastes, which he wrote later in his life, is one of the most brutally honest books ever written by a king. It's not sugar-coated. It doesn't try to impress. It doesn't care about perception. It simply speaks raw truth that life without purpose is meaningless. That pleasure without wisdom becomes addiction. That success without eternity in mind turns to dust. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, he wrote, and you can hear it in his voice, that holy ache of a man who tasted everything the world had to offer and found that without God it all turned to ash in his mouth. That's the kind of truth only those who have been to the top understand, that the mountaintop doesn't save you if your soul is still starving. Solomon's life proves something painful and beautiful, that you can have everything and still feel empty if you forget why you started. You can have all the answers and still feel lost if you disconnect from the source of all truth. Wisdom without reverence turns to pride. Insight without submission leads to destruction. And that's the caution behind Solomon's brilliance. He was given more than any man before him, and yet in his later years he let compromise creep in. That's not just a story, that's a warning, because the higher you go, the more seductive the distractions become. The wiser you get, the more subtle your pride becomes. And unless you stay anchored, you'll drift. Even if you once saw clearly, even if you once walked in fire, you can still fall if you stop fearing the one who gave you everything. One of Solomon's secrets was understanding how easily the human heart forgets. That's why he kept writing. That's why he kept speaking in parables, metaphors, images, because he knew truth slips through the cracks. If it's not repeated, if it's not wrestled with, he wrote Proverbs for the young man who would one day lead. He wrote Ecclesiastes for the old man who might have forgotten why he started. And somewhere in between those two voices is you, standing at a crossroads, wondering what really matters. Solomon's life is the map, but it's not just to be read, it's to be lived. And maybe that's the most important secret of all, that wisdom is a daily choice, not a one-time gift. You don't just have wisdom, you become wise through humility, through discipline, through repentance, through correction. Solomon didn't ask for riches, but he was given them. He didn't ask for long life, but he received peace. Why? Because he aligned his request with divine priorities. And when your priorities match heaven's order, heaven responds. That's the key. Stop asking for things. Start asking for clarity. Stop begging for shortcuts. Start building stamina. Stop crying for breakthroughs. Start walking in obedience. Wisdom doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need. And once you receive that, you become unstoppable. One of Solomon's greatest secrets is revealed not in what he built for himself, but in what he built for God. Before constructing his own palace, before solidifying his own name, before expanding his own kingdom, he built the temple. Think about that. The man who had access to unlimited gold, cedar from Lebanon, artisans from the finest corners of the world, didn't start with luxury. He started with reverence. His first priority was to establish a dwelling place for the presence of God, and that choice tells you everything. Solomon knew that success built without sacred alignment would always collapse, that the blessing becomes a curse when it no longer bows to the one who gave it. So he built the temple first, not because he had to, but because he understood if God is not first, everything else is cursed. The temple was more than a building. It was a symbol of honor, of order, of submission. Every detail was specific, every material intentional, every measurement sacred. Solomon didn't cut corners. He didn't improvise. He followed instruction to the letter. Because real wisdom doesn't just create, it obeys. It doesn't just innovate, it submits to the pattern. That's something modern minds don't want to hear. We're addicted to customization, rebellion, doing things our way. But Solomon's greatness came from his ability to recognize divine structure. He knew you can't ask for God's blessing on a blueprint you designed in pride. You must build according to heaven's order. That's what releases favor that lasts. Now look at what happened next after the temple was completed. The Queen of Sheba heard about him. She didn't come because of gossip or flattery. She came because his wisdom was so loud, it echoed through nations. And when she arrived, she didn't just see wealth, she saw order. She saw how his servants dressed, how his table was set, how his attendants stood, and she was overwhelmed. Why? Because excellence is the language of kings. Solomon's wisdom wasn't just in words, it was in systems, in his leadership, in the culture he created. She came expecting riches and left stunned by how he carried himself. That's another secret. True wisdom manifests in how you manage your environment, your time, your people, your energy. But here's the deeper layer behind the Queen of Sheba's visit. She came to test him with hard questions. She didn't come to flatter, she came to confront. And Solomon didn't flinch. That's the mark of real wisdom. It welcomes challenge. It doesn't run from pressure. It's not intimidated by deep questions. It responds with clarity, not defensiveness. Solomon didn't impress her with charm. He disarmed her with substance. And that kind of depth can't be faked. It comes from time in silence, from wrestling with truth, from asking God the hard questions before the world does. The reason he could handle her questions is because he had already faced his own. Another divine layer of Solomon's life is this. He used honor as a weapon. You see, in a world obsessed with being right, being loud, being dominant, Solomon ruled through honor. He honored the legacy of his father David. He honored the covenant of his forefathers. He honored the presence of God. He honored the wisdom passed down through generations. And because of that, honor opened doors. No battle ever could. It brought alliances without war. It brought wealth without conflict. That's a secret most people overlook. Honor multiplies what effort can't reach. When you honor right things, the heavens align to reward you. When you dishonor sacred things, even your talent turns against you. Solomon knew that. That's why his wisdom wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Let me tell you something else. Hidden in Solomon's story, he didn't just build, he governed. And that's harder. Anyone can start something, but to sustain it, that takes another level of strength. After the temple was built, after his palace was finished, after the borders were secured, he maintained order. And that's where most leaders break. They think the work is done when the goal is reached. But Solomon knew, when God gives you territory, your real test begins. Can you lead with consistency when the crisis is gone? Can you remain aligned when the applause fades? Can you steward peace with the same passion you fought for victory? That's where wisdom separates the called from the chosen. And still, despite all this glory, there was a warning woven through his life. Solomon's downfall didn't come from war. It came from women, from compromise, from tolerating what he once would have cast out. He married foreign wives, not just for love, but for alliances. He let their gods into his kingdom, slowly, subtly, and that's how the erosion began. The same man who once bowed before the ark now bowed to idols. He didn't crash, he drifted, and that's the scariest part. That's the final secret. The fall of the wise is rarely sudden. It's always gradual. It's always justified. It always begins with a small yes to the wrong thing. And by the time you realize what you've built, it's too late to tear it down without tearing yourself apart. Solomon's story is not just a model. It's a mirror that shows you your potential and your vulnerability, a mirror that reflects the heights of wisdom and the depths of distraction. He was the wisest man on earth, but even he couldn't escape the cost of divided loyalty. And maybe that's the final layer of his genius. He wrote down his warnings before his fall. Ecclesiastes was his confession. Proverbs was his instruction. And both remain because God allowed even his failure to carry a message. That wisdom doesn't guarantee victory. It only gives you the chance. What you do with it is still a choice. You see, Solomon didn't just build a temple. He built a replica of heaven on earth. The measurements, the materials, the layout, all of it was patterned after something eternal. Gold-covered walls to reflect glory. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could enter once a year, symbolizing the hidden presence of God. Everything was layered with meaning. Nothing was accidental, because wisdom doesn't just create what's functional, it creates what's sacred. That's the kind of insight Solomon operated with. He didn't just ask, will this work? He asked, will this please the Most High? That's a forgotten wisdom in today's world. We've replaced divine precision with self-expression, but Solomon teaches us there is power in alignment. When you follow God's patterns, you build things that last beyond you. Now here's where it gets prophetic. The temple Solomon built was glorious, but temporary. Centuries later, it would be torn down, desecrated, rebuilt, and torn down again. Why? Because God was using Solomon's temple to foreshadow a greater one, not made of stone, but of spirit. You, me, us. Don't you know you are the temple of God, the New Testament says? Solomon's wisdom wasn't just architectural, it was spiritual scaffolding, a shadow of something coming. And yet, even in the shadow, the glory was so thick the priests couldn't stand. Imagine that. The presence of God so heavy that trained men collapsed. That's what Solomon invited by honoring divine instruction to the letter. You want that level of presence in your life? Then build like he did, in obedience, in fear, in excellence. Let's go deeper still. Solomon's relationship with God started in purity, but slowly unraveled into distance. And this is a tragic paradox that you can know about God, speak for God, be blessed by God, and still wander far from his heart. Solomon didn't stop believing in God, but he stopped fearing him. And that shift, subtle but deadly, is where everything began to rot. He started making room for other voices. He married women who worshipped idols, not just because of lust, but because of politics, because of alliances, because of power. That's the real seduction, when good strategy leads you into spiritual compromise. When you think, this won't affect me, I'm still faithful at heart. But it does affect you. Slowly, it steals your fire, then your clarity, then your calling. And one day you wake up in a palace you built, but you don't recognize the man in the mirror anymore. But even in his fall, Solomon's writing remained. Why? Because the anointing wasn't on his perfection. It was on his assignment. God let him fall, but he didn't erase his words. That should both comfort and convict you. Comfort you because your failure doesn't cancel your calling, but convict you because your gifts can still operate even when your soul is in rebellion. Solomon's life is a warning. Don't confuse grace for approval. Just because God still uses you doesn't mean He's still pleased with you. The most dangerous place you can be is effective and disobedient. That's why wisdom without surrender is incomplete. It makes you impressive but not transformed. There's another key you can't miss. Solomon understood the weight of words. That's why Proverbs are so short, but so sharp. Every phrase, every sentence was forged in fire. He didn't write to entertain. He wrote to shape nations. He knew the tongue carries the power of life and death. And if you don't master it, it will master you. That's a level of wisdom we desperately need now. In a world where everyone is speaking, Solomon whispers, be slow to speak, fast to listen, speak life or stay silent. That's how kings talk, not with noise, but with knowing. And yet, Solomon's life is also a study in duality. In one hand, divine brilliance, in the other, human blindness. And maybe that's why his writings feel so real, because they come from a man who walked both heaven and hell, who soared in glory and fell in shame. His words aren't theory, they're scars. And maybe that's the deepest wisdom of all, that your greatest lessons won't come from what you mastered, but from what broke you. That your pain becomes prophecy when you surrender it. That your failure, when offered back to God, becomes a manual for others. That's what Solomon gave us. Not perfection, but perspective. So what do you take from his life? You take the discipline to build the temple first. You take the humility to ask for wisdom, not wealth. You take the courage to lead with honor, not force. You take the discernment to shut your mouth until your words carry weight. You take the reverence to obey even when no one's watching. And you take the warning to guard your gate, because even the wisest man in history fell, not from weakness, but from slow, strategic compromise. Then let's keep going into the part of Solomon's story that most people avoid, the part that doesn't end in gold or glory, but in division, in heartbreak, in silence. Because after all the glory, all the building, all the wisdom, Solomon's kingdom didn't last. And that truth alone should shake you awake. Here was the wisest man who ever lived, the one who saw visions, walked in divine favor, spoke proverbs that still echo thousands of years later. But after his death, the kingdom of Israel was torn in two, north and south. 10 tribes here, 2 tribes there. Once united under David, expanded by Solomon, now shattered. Not because of an enemy, not because of an invasion, but because of compromise. The same compromise that started in Solomon's heart was passed to his son and eventually to the people. You see, the real legacy you leave behind isn't written in your monuments, it's planted in your decisions. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, didn't inherit wisdom, he inherited options. But instead of listening to the elders who had walked with his father, he listened to his friends, the ones who had no scars, no reverence, no vision. And because of that, he ruled with arrogance. He chose control over counsel, harshness over humility. And just like that, the kingdom fractured. Let that sink in. Solomon's lapse in discernment didn't just affect his story, it affected an entire generation. That's another secret of wisdom. What you tolerate in private will multiply in public. What you excuse in your heart becomes what others normalize in their culture. But even in this fall, something prophetic was happening. You see, Solomon came from the line of David, and from that line, generations later, would come Jesus. And Jesus would say something that echoes all the way back to Solomon. One greater than Solomon is here. That line wasn't arrogance, it was alignment. Jesus was revealing something hidden in Solomon's story all along, that Solomon was a shadow, a preview, a glimpse of a king who would not fall. A king who would not compromise. A king who would carry not just wisdom, but truth in its purest. Solomon ruled with wisdom. Jesus was wisdom. Solomon built a temple. Jesus became the temple. Solomon offered sacrifices. Jesus was the sacrifice. Solomon lost the kingdom. Jesus established an eternal one. That's the full circle. That's the final code. That all earthly wisdom points to something higher. That no matter how brilliant your mind, how vast your empire, how loud your name, if it's not rooted in the eternal, it will rot. Solomon is proof that wisdom without worship leads to ruin. But he's also proof that God will use your ruin to birth revelation for those who come after you. And maybe that's the redemption of Solomon's story. That despite his fall, his words remain. That despite his failure, his prayers still teach. That even in regret, his legacy became a mirror to warn you, to teach you, to prepare you. Because the truth is, many people today are walking in Solomon's shoes, blessed, gifted, respected, but drifting, building palaces while neglecting the temple, holding favor but playing with fire, speaking wisdom but living in contradiction, and they don't realize that the fracture begins small, quiet, just a crack in conviction, just a bending of boundaries, but it always ends the same, in silence where there once was fire. So what do you do with all of this? You honor Solomon's brilliance, but you learn from his blind spots. You pursue wisdom, but you stay on your knees. You build with excellence, but never at the cost of your soul. You lead, but you never stop listening. And you remember this. You are the temple now. What you let in, what you bow to, what you prioritize, it matters. Not just for you, but for everyone who will walk in the world you leave behind. And when you understand that, when you finally grasp what Solomon's life was really pointing to, you'll stop chasing crowns and start becoming the kind of person God can trust to wear one. So now I ask you, are you building like Solomon or drifting like he did? Are you chasing wisdom or just the rewards of it? Because your future won't be shaped by what you know. It'll be shaped by what you honor. Comment below, I choose wisdom over the world. If you're done chasing what fades and ready to build what lasts.